It's a warm welcome again to the Matchbook NFL Betting Podcast. I am joined, as ever, by the unholy trinity of Mr. Brad Allen, the top right of your screen, Mr. Drew Dinsick at the bottom right, and Mr. Adam Chernoff at the bottom left. You are most welcome now if you're watching us live on Twitter, Facebook, and our YouTube channels, or indeed if you're listening back to us on the podcast. Hopefully, we will get you into the winner's circle during Divisional weekend. Not such a great wildcard weekend, personally, for me. Drew, not too bad for you. Seahawks came through.
Yeah. It's the world-beating NFC title champs. That performance right there, man. I mean, if that doesn't inspire you that they're going to win the NFC, I don't know what will. No, the Seahawks are the Seahawks. They win these 50-50 games. Another tough competition. This is not a great spot for them. In my enthusiasm for them to win the NFC, I was more hopeful that they would get a crack at San Francisco off the bye as opposed to Green Bay. This is a tougher matchup for them. The weather does not look to be particularly nice. There are some matchup advantages that favor the Seahawks in this, but it takes them out of their optimal offense, which is concerning to a degree. But overall, I thought the results from Wild Card Weekend were pretty fair. Other than the Bills, I thought the right teams won, the Vikings coming away with the upset was pretty huge in terms of kind of reshaping the fabric of the NFC.
Brad Allen, speaking of the Bills, we were pretty lucky with the Texans.
Were we lucky? I don't know. It was a game of two halves, wasn't it?
4 halves.
yeah, extra halves, wasn't it? I don't know. They needed a spark, and they got a sack, and Deshaun put the team on his back, and I think talent won through in the end, I guess.
Adam Chernoff, what about those Patriots? I mean, you look at this game against the Titans, and outside of Derrick Henry, what did the Titans actually do to win that game? Didn't have to do much.
Well, they passed for 73 yards, so I guess that counts for something. But I didn't expect. I guess the positive is I can't bet on them anymore, so I'm not going to lose any more money on the Patriots. But I didn't really expect to lose a game with the opponent throwing for 73 yards in Foxborough of all places. So nevertheless,
what was he? 8 out of 16. An ugly one. 8 out of 16. All he did
8 out of 15. Yep.
Yeah, AJ Brown 1 catch 4 yards. So there you go. They go into Foxborough and win the game. God bless Derrick Henry is what I would say on this one. Right, guys, a small bit of housekeeping to take care of. First of all, as you can see on screen right now, we are nominated for the Best Betting Podcast in the Smart Betting Club Awards in 2020. We won this last year, guys, so the Patriots couldn't repeat, but we're hoping that we'll be able to repeat. We're up against some stiff competition. Our main competitor is now in the betting podcast market. They who will remain nameless, but I will say this: I don't listen to all their podcasts, but listen to our NFL podcast and listen to a few minutes of theirs. And I think within 5 minutes you will vote for us. Okay, ballsy statement, but I think the guys have listened to some of theirs because we are always looking at competitor analysis. And yeah, you'll vote for us if you want to vote for us too, guys. Pin tweet on the Team Matchbook Twitter page or the Team. What is it called? The Matchbook Pod Twitter page. Also will be in the bio description for the podcast. Drew Dinsick, excited. You're only in the door a couple of months. We're nominated for awards again.
People are saying the new dynasty here at the Matchbook Betting Podcast. I've lost track of how many commentators I've heard make this. It's almost getting a little. It's getting a little faith public-y here in terms
too many people are saying.
Too many people are saying it. You hate it when it's just consensus.
That will happen. That will happen. Like I said, guys, pin tweets on our Twitter account, and it's in the bio description for the podcast. It would be great if you help us out with that. Keep the bosses happy, and keep Brad Allen in Detroit Lions t-shirts as well, bro. That is very very important as well. Right, let's move on to the important business this weekend. First up, let's take a look at the Minnesota Vikings, San Francisco 49ers. As you can see on screen now, if you are joining us live, and by the way, feel free to get some comments or questions into us. Minnesota Vikings 3.72 on the money line. San Francisco 49ers at 1.35. 7 points the Vikings are getting at 1.97. 44 is the total. Brad Allen, I will start with you here first. Wildcard weekend, as kind of a more inexperienced bettor, used to kind of trap me before. I would watch a team on wildcard weekend, you get enamored by them, then you see them getting a lot of points against, the 1 or the 2 seed. This seems like a spot that the Vikings will get a bit of support in, given, what they've done it. New Orleans last week. 7 fair to be backing them +7, Prof?
I would lean the other way. I mean, you must remember 2 weeks ago, I think it was, where they got destroyed on Monday night at home by the Green Bay Packers. Then obviously they put out a half team at home for the Bears. All the money was all over the Saints last week, and one close win, and suddenly now they're the public team.
Yeah,
I don't really see it. I think if you look at the market, it's pretty interesting. Obviously, the Vikings probably went off 7.5 was probably consensus last week, and they're saying probably here that the Saints are a slightly better team than the Niners, because the Niners, obviously, they've got the rest. The Vikings are traveling back to Minnesota from New Orleans, then over to the West Coast as well. But also the market told us in week 14 that San Francisco was 2 points better than the Saints when they went off about +1 in New Orleans. So, I don't really get this line just from a market perspective. And then I think on the field, it's also shaping up probably favorably for San Francisco, especially compared to last week. We know the weakness of this Vikings defense is the cornerbacks. I mean, we saw last week the Rhodes was out. I think Mackenzie Hughes was put on IR before the game, but Breeze couldn't really take advantage of it. A, because his arm was a bit dead, and B, they couldn't protect. So we know, A, that Jimmy Garoppolo does have the arm. We saw when Taysom Hill came in that the deep ball was there. So I think there will be some deep opportunities for the Niners. And then will they be able to protect? Yes, I think they will. Their guards are better than the Saints. And they've also, in the right tackle, they've got in the right guard, they've got a former tackle there who's grading out very well by pass protection. Obviously, that kind of NASCAR package where they move like Donnell Hunter inside and rush against the guards, that's now on tape as well. I expect Shanahan to have some, have some preparation for that. So I do think that the Vikings defense will be there to be had by Shanahan cooking up some points. And then the other side of the ball, the Niners defense is suddenly looking very healthy and kind of like the unit it was early in the season. Jaquiski Tart should be back. D Ford should be back. Quan Alexander should be back. And this is suddenly the defense that was, shutting everyone down in the first 8 weeks, rather than the team that was getting ripped up the last 8 weeks. And I suppose the last thing I would say would be the pass rush of this San Francisco D-line against the Vikings offensive line. Back to that Monday night in Green Bay, Za'Darius, the Smith brothers, they just destroyed this Vikings offensive line. It didn't happen so much last week. Kirk Cousins got rid of the ball very quickly, but he was still getting hit a lot. He was still pressured. He was sacked. He was hit, hurried, and pressured more than 12 times in that game. And so if he's getting that pressure in his face again, the Niners cornerbacks, second ranked by PFF, they're good enough to cover just long enough where he won't be able to just chuck it up like he did to Thielen last week. So I think we might be seeing a lot of pressure in Kirk's face, and I'm not sure whether he'll be able to deliver again.
Adam Chernoff, Kirk Cousins finally delivering on the big stage. That was a daytime game, nighttime game, but we're not buying into that, Adam, surely, all this kind of... Yeah, I saw you having a back and forth with a guy on Twitter during the week about this. So, I mean, explain that one for a second before we go any further.
No, I think I was asking what the lines and the price should be, and there was a reply that I got about how Kirk Cousins has extreme OCD, and therefore if he's always playing in the same time slot, his preparation is always the same and he performs better, which was an interesting response to
That's
say
the
same
least. For every player
and to keep the answer safe here on the podcast tonight. Yeah. I think Brad handicapped this game extremely well. I look at it, I agree with everything he said, but I guess think about it how everything in that Saints game really clicked for the Vikings within the matchup. And I think the one thing Brad didn't mention that I can sort of add to that would be that the Saints defensive line, something we talked about here on the podcast last week, they had those two key injuries in that San Francisco game in week 14. They were not tested in week 15, 16, or 17 in terms of the opposing running back. And we talked about the Viking scheme and how could it exploit that. And I think we saw how big those injuries were, number one, but how slow the front seven for the Saints overall is in those situations. And Minnesota was able to get really anything they wanted running the football from that outside zone scheme. Against this 49ers defensive front, extremely different. We know how fast the 49ers defensive front is. We know how well they can set the edge. And as Brad mentioned, we know how well they can generate pressure. they're blitzing at one of the lowest rates in the NFL, but their pressure rate is still among the best in the NFL, second in adjusted sack rate. So much like the Packers, they can get home with just a couple guys rushing up front, not needing to bring those extra guys and expose some weaknesses back in the secondary. But then also when the Vikings, you look at that big play they finally had to Thielen in overtime, that was the first play after Lattimore went out with an injury. So they took advantage of that really well. They took advantage of the fast playing surface too. And I'm sort of going down a rabbit hole here, but I remember back in 2011, and this is not necessarily pushing for an angle, but the whole talk about the week and the final sort of 12 to 14 hours before the kickoff against the Saints in the playoff game, another team coming over from a fast surface, was how the 49ers accidentally left the sprinklers on and really bogged down that field, and it slowed the Saints down, at least for the first quarter. But I think that the surface plays a little bit into this. I'm not implying that there's anything going on behind the scenes, but you get the Vikings off of that fast surface onto the grass. That slows down not only their pass rush, but also their offensive scheme, running the football outside, plays well into the 49ers and how they match up defensively. I think this is just a very different look. I think the 49ers are going to be able to generate pressure, but I think the 49ers as well going to be able to get a lot of what they want offensively. The Vikings do rank best in the league at defending tight ends, so maybe this isn't a Kittle game. Maybe this isn't a lot of creativity over the middle, but this is a spot where the 49ers can run the football, but also take advantage of the Minnesota Vikings cornerbacks, which is the biggest liability in their secondary. So I think this is a game where the 49ers move the football out wide, but I do think it starts a little bit slow as both of these teams sort of establish their offensive game plans. So we could see a slow start to this one again with some adjustments. But I think this is a spot where the numbers right now getting to the spot where it's fair. I think it should be 7.5. Just
before I come to Drew, Brad, quickly, you had a stat there you wanted to give us.
Yeah, stat with D Ford on the field, 49ers defense has a 16.2% sack rate. Without D Ford on the field, it's at 5.4%. So they're about 3 times as sack happy when he's on the field. Which I assume is noisy, but he's a big factor.
Well, you can see this, the 49ers defense in the last couple of weeks of the regular season, they have regressed, especially on third down. Drew, where are you lying on this one?
Yeah, I think they've said it all well. Niners by 100. In seriousness, though, I will comment a little bit on the market. I got in at 6.5. I thought that was a very, very generous price. At 7, I still like the 49ers. We've seen a decent amount of steam to the under here, and I'm not 100% sure if I can, look at the way that these teams match up and say that, oh no, this wasn't lined correctly. The Niners should be a higher, should be 7, and the total should be lower. That implies that the Vikings team total was too high, and that the Niners defense is really going to be the distinguishing, matchup or unit here. I think it's much more Shanahan versus the Zimmer defense. Like, he absolutely has the scheme and the tools to make these guys bleed. And the only thing that's in any way keeping this from being kind of my most confident look of the week is that this is Jimmy Garoppolo's first ever playoff start. He's been to 2 Super Bowls as a backup, but he's never been out there actually asked to, do it himself. But the beauty of the Shanahan system is he the first look that he gives Jimmy G is schemed so wide open, and this is not a great matchup for that. On the defensive side to prevent that the way that the Vikings play D. So I think the Niners get theirs. I like the Niners team total over. It's probably going to be in the 25.5, 26 range. I think they get to 28 here pretty comfortably. I could see 30 even. And then, if the total gets there or not is much more a matter of, I think, if the Vikings can score some garbage time points.
Prof, you wanted to come back in for a guy who didn't really want to talk about this game. You really want to talk about it now.
I've been collecting nuggets all week, so I want to share them with you.
Good man.
One was this. I don't know if anyone saw the video with Austin Hooper on one of the US interviews, and he was just going. He came in his rookie year, and Kyle Shanahan would be in the meeting rooms all week going, right, they're going to run this play, and as soon as we do that, we're going to hit this guy over here for a touchdown. And he was just like, the guy is like Nostradamus. Yeah. He's unbelievable. And he was like, I just thought that's how all NFL offensive coaches were. And it turned out, no, Shanahan was just a wizard. So 2 weeks
sarcasm like that?
Yeah.
Dirk Cutter's not like that? No,
he was throwing shade at his current coordinators by going, I thought everyone's like that, and they're not. So I'm sure they watched that. And the last thing was Kirk Cousins in a dome is about 1.5 yards better per pass attempt, which I thought was quite interesting, given he played in Washington for however many years. So it's not just he's at home all the time in a dome. So his efficiency does drop off outdoors, which I thought was a little bit interesting.
Yeah, I think we may need to give it a rest with the whole Kirk Cousins thing, especially after last weekend. It's just one of those. Are we convinced though? One game in New Orleans? No.
They were pathetic in the fourth quarter. They were the better team up front on both sides of the ball, and they just got so in their shells. Like they look like they're up 10 points. They're just running the ball 3 and out. I think their last 3 drives they picked up 13 yards, and they just got bailed out because Breeze was having a shocker. If they kept Taysom Hill in there, they lose the game. And Zimmer is just not aggressive enough to go all the way, I don't think. Yeah,
pretty unlucky there for Taysom Hill. He scared the bejesus out of that Vikings defense. Probably the only player that was doing it right. What are we thinking here, guys, before we move off? So consensus on the Niners here, yeah?
Yeah, Niners -7.
Easy game, -7. Let's lock that in. Right, let's move on to the Titans at the Ravens. Okay, this is a pretty fascinating line, one of the many fascinating lines throughout the weekend that we would get to. First up, we'll take a look at betting here live at Matchbook on screen. Tennessee Titans at 4.5. The Baltimore Ravens, 7,700, even on Wednesday at 1.26. If you fancy that one, 9.5 is the main point spread. Look at those margins, guys. 1.95, 1.98. Nice. And that's on Wednesday. 46.5 is the total. Adam Chernoff, start with you here. Again, there is going to be a bit of a love for the Titans in the marketplace. This market has kind of jumped around. It's kind of back at the opening line at 9.5 now. Where are you lying on this one? Because I think the Ravens, like it's 9.5, they're almost coming in under the radar because they haven't played in 3 weeks.
So if we sort of go through every market as we work through the show here, there's a pretty strong similarity between when these prices moved in relation to when the results of the games last weekend finished. And this was another spot where, just like Minnesota, as that game finished and these prices went up, the initial sort of interest from the market perspective was on the Vikings, and the initial market perspective here was on the Tennessee Titans. And I think to an extent, it's a little bit of getting caught up on the scoreboard and not necessarily seeing the big picture. But then, like you mentioned, you also get that week delay where we just saw the Titans go into Foxborough and win that game. And we saw what Derrick Henry can do. And when there's a successful running game like that, it looks and sort of carries a lot more weight with it because people see it, they understand it, and the announcers really buy into it. And so it creates a lot of that. It's not going to be the same against the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens are worse against the run, 14th in terms of rushing success rate defense for the season compared to 5th against the pass. But it was a size advantage for Tennessee. That was not New England failing to scheme for it. It was just the Tennessee Titans offensive line and Derrick Henry taking advantage of a small front 7 for New England. Baltimore in the front 7, while they're not extremely fast, they are enormous. And so it's not going to be the type of game where Derrick Henry can run and just sort of bowl over guys and bully his way to another 180 yards, whatever he ran for in that spot. Baltimore also extremely good at defending outside zone runs and very good at tackling too. It's not a game where he's going to force a lot of missed tackles. On the season, the Ravens have less than 5 missed tackles on outside zone runs by opponents. So this is a defense that can really match up against what Tennessee wants to do. And I think on the other end as well, the Titans much better defending the run than they are defending the pass. You're not going to stop the Ravens from running the football. Maybe it's not an enormous output game like we've seen in the past, but certainly Baltimore's still going to have a little bit of success. But the Titans much better defending the run. For me, I'm looking at this as 2 of the most efficient offenses in the final 8 weeks of the season, Baltimore for the duration of the season. But this is a spot where I think it's all about the pass and how successful both quarterbacks are. And I'm not sure that's really getting enough talk around and looking at the handicap between the 2 teams. But really early down, specifically Tennessee, 28th defending the pass on first and second down. This is a spot where Baltimore, if they're lining up and sort of designated run down in distances, probably going to have a lot of success throwing the football. And if Tennessee wants a chance at the upset, Titans significantly better on third and fourth down, where Baltimore's been overachieving to an enormous rate. Titans are just going to have to find a way to get there, and I'm not sure they can do it. So to see it's an extremely efficient passing game for Baltimore. And then I think Tennessee with Baltimore really likely sort of selling out to stop the run and prevent Henry is sort of the scheme I anticipate here with what they do in the front seven. I don't think the Ravens secondary is as good from an eye test perspective versus that 5th ranking that they've put up on the season. Tannehill coming off of that 73-yard performance like we talked about at the top of the show. Titans only ran 49 offensive plays in that game against New England, 4.8 yards per play. I think that looks a little bit different too, and Tannehill has some success throwing the football. I'm not sure I see enough from a side here at this big of a number. I would sort of lean to Baltimore, but that's a very soft lean. Probably more interested in the total and the prospect of seeing some points in this game as both teams go to the pass.
Drew Dinsick, you look at the general matchups in this one, and the Tennessee Titans defense in particular is just jumping out at me. And I find it hard to see how they can stop the Ravens here. I think the only thing that stops the Ravens is possibly the Ravens. There could potentially be a bit of rust. Obviously, they rested the majority of their starters on week 17. Is that enough to be kind of jumping on Tennessee here with the points?
I don't think so, personally.
I
think the Ravens are a clear class above the Titans. The Titans' win last week was surprising. I think we all were surprised. I certainly didn't see 13 points coming from the Patriots against that Tennessee Titans defense. But it is what it is, and this Ravens unit is way more dynamic. They have way more ways they can attack you. I guess I lay the points with the Ravens here. I'm in at 8.5. I think at 9.5 it's still a bet. And my general, I guess, if I'm making a case for the Titans at all, and their defense in particular, because I think they're going to have to get it done defensively. I don't think the Titans are going to be able to get more than I think their ceiling is about 20 points offensively here, which only gets them a cover if they can keep. And that's going to be a tough challenge for them. Dean Pease, the defensive coordinator for the Titans, he has kind of a narrow approach in terms of what he does defensively. He likes to create confusing looks for the opposing quarterback. And Lamar Jackson, being that this is only his 2nd playoff start, he could seem a little bit uncomfortable early. There could be a little bit of a difficulty for the Ravens to get going through the air. But I don't think that changes anything in terms of their ability to sustain drives, because I can see them absolutely gashing this Titans team on the ground. The Titans, while they are relatively stout interior, they can be gashed if you can get them on the edge. I think if they've kind of evolved from working hard to mature Lamar Jackson as a passer earlier this season to kind of broadening their playbook and using some more of their kind of dynamic running scheme as we've gotten into the later months, which I think is a brilliant strategy for how you arc your team over the course of the season. John Harbaugh deserves a ton of credit for kind of having that vision. And if they kind of stick to their current identity and what they're doing well, I think they score with ease against this Titans defense.
Prof, you're a man who loves the analytics, and you love it, especially in the NFL. And the Ravens have been off the charts this season. And you look at it like this is 8.5 right now. Sorry, 9.5. They've won 9 games by more than 9 points this season, which shows you a team that will put the foot on the gas. If it's 4th and 3, 4th and 2, they will go for, whereas other teams will punt. Is that kind of an angle you'll be looking at to back the Ravens here? Because they remind me almost, Prof, of the Rams 2 years ago, where even ahead they will keep the foot on the gas.
Yes, I think that is correct. I think I saw they've been covering spreads this year by something like 9.5 points a game. So I guess the way they play with they stay aggressive. They'll be faking punts, going for it on 4th down, even in the 4th quarter, up 10 points. But also the way they run the ball. I think there was an article this week on The Ringer where they just described it as like death by 1,000 cuts until you're just bleeding out, and then they just continue gouging you. So it's just like a relentless attack. They do it all 4 quarters, basically. So I would say the thing I'm most sure about is that the Ravens will score their points. The Titans are like a bottom 10 defense, despite an easy schedule, and the Baltimore Ravens have scored on the most drives of any offense this year. I think they're not a lock, but I would say I'm confident that they're going to hit their output. They're going to hit their 28, 30 points. So the question for me is, what do I think Tennessee can do? And I think there's a few reasons to be bearish on them. One would be the blitz rate. So we know the Ravens are sending blitzes by far the most in the NFL, and about 50% of the time. And Tannehill, his weakness, he's obviously been very good this year, but he's still getting sacked 10% of the time, which is one of the highest in the NFL. He's done it his whole career. He likes to hold onto the ball while he's looking for those deep balls. So I think he might get in a fair bit of trouble holding onto the ball, and I think he will have to hold onto the ball because I don't really see any of Tennessee's weapons that can separate against these three corners. So there was a stat tweeted out by Rich Rebar this week. So AJ Brown's faced 4 teams who are in the top half against defending wide receivers, and his outputs there is one catch for 4 yards, 1 catch for 34 yards, 1 catch for 17 yards, and then 6 for 64. So generally, he has been shut down by kind of elite corners. And then while Baltimore have had their 3 top corners on the field this year, they've given up 14.5 points a game. So I think we could see Tanny sitting in the pocket, holding onto the ball, and then the blitz getting to him a fair bit. So I've not bet this game, but I would probably lean Ravens, maybe Ravens team total.
Well, it's kind of interesting with the team total. Obviously, we don't have it this early in the week of match, but we're looking at 46.5. That would indicate it's about 28.5. Like, I think we'd all love to get 27.5 in the Ravens, but I think life is just not that generous, guys.
Like that, no.
So they'll just want to get us over at 28.5. But even
that
that
for
guy,
the first half or the full game?
But even that, Drew, like, I mean, I don't think you'd be very comfortable laying the under 28.5. The Ravens, sitting back and watching Lamar Jackson and those guys popping passes and RPOs all over the shop.
Yeah, no, I mean, this isn't the perfect matchup for them offensively. Like, they're not going to get the home run plays in the passing game, in my opinion. But I don't think it's going to matter, and I don't think that you necessarily really even want that. I think you don't mind at all keeping the Titans offense on the sidelines, keeping Tannehill. I think you want to force Tannehill to be the hero and to do exactly like Brad laid out. Like, make him hold the ball too long, make him take the sacks, because you're going to get to him. You have the personnel, you have the packages to do it. So I do think that is a pretty important distinguishing factor.
Adam Chernoff. Sorry, Adam, can you answer that question? Is Ingram 100%? Mark Ingram, you're a good guy for the team news.
He is not 100%. He had tightness in his calf or his leg. I can't remember what muscle specifically, but he was taken out. He wasn't on the practice field yesterday, and he was limited. But they also made an acquisition from. They signed another running back and brought him onto the active roster. So anytime you see that happen at a specific position, especially on offense, that's usually not a good sign, and you can sort of read between the lines. Playoff games, you never know, but pretty concerning not to see him at practice yesterday. He said if he can get a limited practice today or tomorrow, he'll go, but doesn't sound overly positive with the downgrade. That's
okay, though, because they've got a running back playing quarterback is fantastic. Brad Allen, what were you going to say there, mate? Sorry.
I was going to say, obviously, there was a lot of talk about Derrick Henry last week, and how he put the team on his back, yada yada. And the Ravens are kind of below average against the run in a lot of categories. But again, they scored 14 points on offense. So, if they score 14 points on offense here and give Derrick Henry the ball 35 times, the Ravens are going to win by 16. So.
Well, that was the thing. That's a really good point, because I was having a discussion with someone else, and it's like, would you rather have Tannehill go for 280 to 300 or Henry go for 225 and Tannehill go the other way? And we saw what happens when you put up that many yards on the ground. It kills the game and you don't get your points.
I think there's only so much you can kind of bleed out of Derrick Henry, even in the playoffs. Something like, I know he was out week 16. He had a great game week 17, but it could be just one of those ones. One of the aspects I find fascinating about here, the red zone battle. Tennessee's offense, best in the league, converting in touchdowns, 76.6%. Baltimore defense, third best in the league defensively, giving up 47.7%. So that's a good stat. Who would you fancy there, Drew? I think you'd have to fancy the Ravens defense. No?
Yeah, absolutely. And on top of that, I think the Patriots in the second half, the adjustments that they made to stopping Derrick Henry. I mean, anyone who's chewing film, saw that, this is how you need to do it. If Derrick Henry is getting on you in the first half of this game, I think, the Ravens have the personnel and they have the blueprint, so to speak, what they need to do in the second half adjustment wise.
Prof, where are you leaning on that one?
Yeah, the Titans are way overperforming in the red zone. I don't have the exact stat in front of me, but they're like 20% better than anyone else in the league. So there's no way they're going to continue that.
That's good to follow.
There was one quite an interesting idea that someone was talking about, is that the week after playing the Patriots, teams were struggling to cover because basically how Belichick plays you is probably the correct way to play you, and coaches getting film from the week before and implementing a lot of stuff. So the way they dealt with Tennessee play action, the way they shut down Henry in the second half, it's all on tape for Dean Martindale now. So.
I mean, any team that goes into Foxborough wins with 14 points. I mean, that was unheard of in the playoffs, unheard of in the regular season, that you can't really sustain. Right, let's move on to Sunday night. Houston Texans at the Kansas City Chiefs. Current betting, as you can see on screen, live match, but no 4.65. The Texans, Chiefs 1.26. 9.5 is the point spread. Obviously, the Texans getting the start. 51 is the total. And Drew Dinsick, I will start there with you. I'm thinking you have some strong opinions on this total, sir.
I certainly don't understand 51. 40. If it was on the low side of key number of 47, by all means, fire away on this over. 47.5, maybe 48. It's getting a little sweaty. 48.5. Okay, now I'm thinking under. At 51, I feel like there is a good amount of room here to the under. And most of my handicap, at least in terms of the total here, comes from game state and how we expect to see Houston, especially, attack Kansas City on offense. I, in no way, shape, or form, expect Houston Texans to try to roll out, an aggressive attack, really put points on the board, and ask Kansas City to go toe for toe here. There is a specific way that you keep Kansas City on the sidelines, and it is you use a 3 down approach. You run heavy on early downs, and you take your 4 yards that they give you. And I think Bill O'Brien, that plays almost exactly into what he would most like to do in terms of offensive approach. And so I can entirely see a game shortened here just based on how Houston will operate when they have the ball. And then on the flip side, people are kind of assuming that the Chiefs, coming off a bye, that they're this dynamic, Andy Reid, like off a bye, he's so good, like by all means, like lay these points, like the guy's unbelievable. Well, if you kind of go back and kind of comb through the Andy Reid off a bye, there's an awful lot of games that come under. They're not covering because they have these offensive explosions, because he's spent his time on the bye, crafting this exactly perfect way to destroy you. It's much more a fact that the team overall just gives you a complete performance. I'll just go and make a wild speculation that if given 2 weeks, Andy Reid does his work for the offense and then spends a little bit of time with the defense saying, hey, if I were them, this is how I would attack us or something like that. So they get a little bit above average performance out of the defense. And 51, I feel like is pretty disrespectful to the Chiefs defense overall, especially over the last half of this season. Like, this defensive unit has really stepped up their level of play. They have some very sophisticated pass defensive schemes that they're running out there. I know that they lost a very important piece in Juan Thornhill, and that may change the way that they roll out their pass defense looks. But I would be surprised if Texans at all are hitting home runs here. Kind of the Watson magical plays with Fuller on the field. Yeah, they're there. But I'm not seeing it against this Chiefs defense, especially the way they played over the last half of the season. This feels much more like a game that's decided by, 10 points, but well under the total of 51 to me.
Adam Chernoff, it's an interesting market, this one. Open -7.5. I'm pretty sure you're on the Chiefs -8. 9.5. Now, I saw some 10 earlier, which is kind of, to me, is kind of making me want to back the Texans. But where are you sitting? You're happy enough with the Chiefs -8?
Yeah, I am for sure. Some people I bet with more than happy to take that with a pretty hefty stance on -8. To add to what Drew mentioned, I think you also have to sort of account for the Bill O'Brien sort of lack of willing to go for it factor. I've been on about 4 or 5 Texans totals. Not only have I been waiting about 12 weeks for them to run play action on a first down, but I've lost count of how many totals I've been on this year where they get into like 700-800 yard games that end up going under because the Texans end up punting from the opponent's 40 or better 2 to 3 times a game and pin them back with Anger, one of the best punters in the league, inside the 10. And then it's just this back and forth between the 10 and the opponent 40 for the better first half of the game. So I think that's something to consider too. But I look at that game against Buffalo. So a bit of a similar situation. The Texans, 32nd in red zone defense. A lot of luck goes into red zone defense because of where the ball obviously needs to be and how drives need to finish for the offense without an explosive play. But Houston, 32nd in the NFL. And they played up for really the first time the entire season against Buffalo. The Bills in regulation went for 415 yards of offense. They had first downs at the Houston 22, 23, and 14, and came away with 9 combined points on those drives. So despite only scoring 19 points, that was dangerously close to Buffalo hanging 30-plus points on the Houston Texans in a game that probably shouldn't have ended up being as close as it was, let alone the Texans escaping with the win. But you have to wonder, what does this look like now for this Houston defense when they go from a team in Buffalo who put up that kind of yardage and output, and the Bills ranking 28th in the pass for success rate on the season and 10th in the run. Now they go into KC and play a team that's 3rd passing and 5th ranked running the football, with Williams back fully healthy, going to be the go-to back out of the bye. Kansas City, another interesting point about the Chiefs this week. There was a tweet that came out. Every single player on the active roster was at practice, practicing in full. When you get to the divisional round of the playoffs and you see that every single player on the active roster is practicing in full, that gets awfully interesting for the health of a team going into a playoff game like this. A lot of sort of pointing will be done to that game that Houston went into Kansas City early in the year, won 31-24 after that Colts game. Chiefs were on the short week. It was the worst game of Patrick Mahomes' career by far from a grading perspective. And to put it in sort of context, he still went for 273, 3 touchdowns and a pick, but worst graded game of his career. A lot really stems from the ankle injury, which was the first game that he had to deal with that in full, coming off of the short week against the Colts. So how healthy was he in that spot? Chiefs were dealing with a number of other injuries on offense in that spot as well. Think this is an awfully difficult spot for the Houston Texans. But like Drew said, a game plan if they want to attack KC, if it stays close enough for like the first quarter and a half where Kansas City doesn't get out to a double-digit lead, I think this really sets up well for the typical O'Brien game plan here and what he wants to do going against the Chiefs, where their one weakness, certainly not the secondary, where among the league best at defending wide receivers, it's against the run. So if Houston can get something going on the ground early, can keep this game close, wouldn't be touching this total. But KC at 8, certainly interesting. At 10 now, I'm probably waiting for a middle to go back the other way at 10.5.
We just know Mr. Bill O'Brien is going to want to commit to this running game. It's just one of these old school coaching. You've got to establish the run. Forget about the fact that you've got Deshaun Watson at quarterback. Prof, Adam keen on the Chiefs minus the 80. Obviously got the better number early on the week. Drew loving under 51. Where are you on this one?
Not a game I've bet yet. I would probably lean to the over. I made it about 51.5. So not enough for me to bet it. But so I do buy into this Andy Reid off a bye. He will have spent 2 weeks cooking up all sorts for a Houston Texans that defense that we know is bottom 5. And we know the Chiefs, with all their weapons healthy, they score 35 a game. So again, I don't see any reason why they're not going to hit that. And then I would rather back Deshaun Watson with Will Fuller on the field, where he's 1.5 yards per pass better. DeAndre Hopkins, the running game, which should have success.
But are we absolutely sure Will Fuller is going to go?
We're not absolutely sure.
We're never sure. Ever.
No, he's expected to, and obviously he could come in. It's a groin. He could play 10 snaps and be out again. But I don't know. Say we give him a 50% chance of playing all game, then we add 0.75 yards per attempt on. But so I think it's an upgrade. And Deshaun Watson's got this history. I think he's lost one game by more than a touchdown since high school, right? Against the Ravens this year. And I obviously the Chiefs' pass defense has improved, but you know how I feel about defensive statistics, especially in half a season sample. I would much rather put my money on Deshaun Watson and that attack to keep up, because they'll be forced to as well. I think it won't be Bill O'Brien going, all right, it's 4th and 1 from the 40. Let's punt. I think if they're down 14 early, they've got to start slinging it around the yard, and You also see mobile quarterbacks running more often in the playoffs. Well, we did last week anyway. So Deshaun Watson sprinting around the field. I think there'll be points personally.
Well, you see, I think that's going to be a common enough narrative, guys. I mean, you look at Deshaun Watson, Patrick Mahomes. There isn't too many people going to be mad running through window to back the under here, Drew. And that's probably going to come in your favor because if you look at this number, it could be trending up towards 51.5, 52. So it might be one of those ones to maybe hold a bit of fire.
Okay, so a couple rebuttals here. Number one,
yes, right.
I'll pull out some trends that'll blow your mind. This will be the seventh. Seventh Andy Reid playoff game in his career. Come with an extra week to prepare. To this point, all 6 previous went under, and the average total in those games was 44. And so now you're adding another, 7 points, and we're still, we're still talking about this going over is tough. If you look over the course of all Andy Reid.
Yeah, but did he have Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill and those kind of weapons?
Last year he did.
One year, yeah.
Last year he did. And I can tell you that was a dead nut under from the first whistle. Like there was absolutely no way that one was going over. And granted, like my opinion of this is that there's going to be a little bit of a grind and a slow start here because Texans get the ball first, or even their first couple possessions. I would entirely expect them to bleed 4 or 5 minutes off the clock. You'll get a shot here in game, in running, maybe at halftime to come back and fire away on a middle where I think this probably lands in the 47 range. So that, that's kind of my approach heading into this. But just in specific matchups that I think lean to the under, number one, Mahomes is by far and away the most effective passing when he breaks the pocket and he rolls right. Okay. And if you can visualize that, what's happening in your head, that he is rolling right into J.J. Watt's side of the field. J.J. Watt looked like he was playing with fresh legs in the second half of that game against the Bills. He was, much more of a differentiating factor than I ever expected heading into that game. And I don't love the idea of him being able to hit home runs to his guys who are, breaking coverage well downfield, rolling into J.J. Watt's side of the pass rush. Similarly, Deshaun Watson is most effective just when he breaks the pocket. But the question I have is he going to be able to get away from Chris Jones, who's matched up with a really weak interior offensive line for the Texans? And I can see Watson taking quite a few sacks here, especially as the interior pressure kind of chases him down as he's rolling out, waiting for his guys to create separation downfield.
He took 7 against Buffalo.
Yeah.
It's a lot. He does hold on to the ball a long time. But then again, if he has Will Fuller, he might just stretch out the field. Prof, we leave it there. Are you anything else to argue with?
I could argue for a while, but
yeah.
Come on, we'll move on to it.
It's been a couple of weeks before yourself and Drew have had a bit of a dust-up.
Yeah.
So it's good. It's healthy. That's all I'm going to say. It's healthy.
On we go.
On we go. Sunday night, late game. Prof, you're sleeping in, I presume, Monday after this. This is a terrible 20 to 12 start for us in the UK and Ireland. Current betting at Matchbook: Seattle Seahawks 2.82, Green Bay Packers 1.53. 4 points the Seahawks are getting on the main handicap. 47 is the total. Hands in the air. Who's bet this one? Whose strongest opinion? Because I don't know where to go on this one. Anyone want to jump in?
I have bet this.
Prof, go. Tell us. What are we
betting? Away.
Yeah, well, I've got a bit of Seahawks +4. I mean, the line tells you kind of where the market is on the Packers. Like Rodgers is 20th in QBR this year. The offense has been just nowhere near what you would expect from Rodgers and Matt LaFleur, the boy genius. They've been just middle of the pack. Defense has been up and down. It looks a bit like if you can block them, then they're not that good because the Smith brothers off the edge. If they get in the backfield and cause havoc, then they can shut you down like the Vikings. But if they're not getting pressure or you're escaping the pressure, then the back end isn't that good. The Seahawks protected better than I expected last week against the Eagles. Watched a lot of that game, and I was surprised how long Russ did have in the pocket. And obviously, he's very escapable. And he should be getting this week his left tackle Dwayne Brown back, guard Mike Iupati back. So I do like the Seahawks' chance to A, throw the ball, and then B, run the ball, because we know that's where the Packers are actually weakest as well. So I think we should see some success. I thought it was interesting that Wilson is 10-4 against the spread when he's an underdog of more than 3 points. I know it's a bit trendy, but it's a bit like the Deshaun Watson one. As soon as he gets down, the Seahawks, they have to actually let him play, let him start chucking the ball, let him do his magic in the pocket, running around. And I think there is something to that he keeps it. He will keep it close either way. And yeah, the Packers just have done nothing this season that suggests they're a 13-3 team. So yeah, I like Wilson to keep on close with some magic.
Adam Chernoff, just to Brad's last point there, the Packers as a 13-3 team must be the most polarizing 13-3 team of all time, because you've heard so many different opinions. And let's be honest about it, most are in the negative camp here. That who have they actually beaten, and are they actually any good at all?
Well, I think, not to pat the show on the back, but the fact that we were able to go into this game and leave that for sort of the last point talks a lot about the difference of the show, because this is absolutely the game that anyone in the media is going to be talking about, making a case for a team just because the other team doesn't deserve to be there. And there's a point to that, obviously, too. We're looking at two teams in the divisional round of the playoffs that are both a net negative in yards per play for the season. Seattle minus 0.1, Green Bay minus 0.2. We have all seen the tweet probably by now where if you flip the one-score games, Seattle has the worst record in the NFL. And then you look at the Packers, like you mentioned, outgained in half of their wins from a net yards per play perspective. So obviously that's sort of the case to be made. I think what Brad said was sort of spot on about the matchup. I think from the numbers perspective, you get the Packers in the divisional round. There's always going to be a bit of an uptick for home field advantage. It's probably when home field advantage is the strongest over the course of the season, just due to the situation. The previous team coming off of a road game, having to go against a team coming off of the bye in the playoffs. You see a little bit more. So I don't think that it's a stretch to say that these two teams are really priced as even. And this is in many ways a coin flip game. And you're looking at the Seahawks catching 4. I actually think that, and this might be a hot take, as they call it, which is not really my style, but I think this is a game where the Seahawks have a lot of success running the football, despite the issues they have in the backfield. The Green Bay Packers have shown no interest whatsoever in putting personnel on the field to match up and defend the run of an opponent. And we've seen this team get outsized against any team that can provide any sort of physical run game a number of different times. You can think back to the Eagles game. You can think back to the first Vikings game. You can think back to a number of different spots in the season where
the Lions,
the Lions game,
171 yards to the Lions. Can anyone actually name the Lions running backs?
And it's, I guess, Bo Scarborough game. I don't know who it was, but nevertheless, like you look at this personnel pack, and it's Mike Pettin just wanting to play with extra defensive backs. So if you get Marshawn Lynch out there, we'll call it a comfortable 240 pounds. It's like we saw him against the Eagles where he was getting hit and going backwards. The Eagles top 3 in run defense across the board. Great defensive line. But this is a spot where he's going to be bigger than a lot of the guys within that front 7. It's a tackle and fall forward to gain 3 or 4. It's a spot where the Packers generate so much downfield pressure that it's just a dump pass for a screen that can open up for 20, 30 yards within it just sets up really well for Seattle offensively. And I think that's getting neglected a little bit, that it's not necessarily going to have to be that game where Seattle backs into a game plan, ends up being forced to throw the football, and then find success off of it. I think it's a spot where we see Seattle really get what they want early within the game and have some success running the football and build off of that. Little concerned about the Seattle Seahawks defensively matched up against the Packers, as poor as the Seattle defense is. This is still Aaron Rodgers in a playoff game at home. It's a difficult spot to oppose, but the first 15 plays is going to be key in this game for establishing how this ultimately plays out. Packers, best scripted team in the NFL, have a ton of success in those plays. There's an extra week for prep for these plays against the Seattle Seahawks. We know Seattle, one of the slower starting teams in the NFL. The Packers, when they're trailing, wildly inefficient. And this offense for Green Bay, as much success as Aaron Jones is going to have in this game against the Seattle Seahawks defense, it's just not built to come back and make up a deficit. And we've seen them struggle anytime that they fall behind and get into really close games at best. So if Green Bay in that script doesn't work initially and Seattle can sort of flip things around and get a score early, which is a bit unheard of for them, if that can sort of flip, it's going to be tough for Green Bay to come back in this spot. So really the first 15 plays going to ultimately settle this. But in the coin flip game, I think you at least have to take the points And potentially we see this come off to the 4 and you buy back the other way. Might see it, but it's a coin flip here. So I'm not too concerned having the points in my pocket.
It's interesting when you mention the first couple of plays, because Matt LaFleur is scripting plays quite well for this Packers offense this season. If you look at the first 15, 20 plays. Drew Dinsick, what are you thinking on this one? Also, guys, Russell Wilson all of a sudden has a brand new toy to play with. DK Metcalf, bit of a beastly performance. What was it, 167 yards, something like that, receiving against the Eagles? Drew, I'm getting carried away, but I'm a big fan of DK Metcalf. What are you thinking on this one?
Yeah, Metcalf has a nice matchup against Kevin King. Good luck to Kevin King this weekend. I obviously see value on Seahawks +4. I see almost every Seahawks game as pretty close to 50-50.
Last week,
on the way they play it and just sort of their strength. And they're never going to be out of the game, even if. But I guess I haven't made a pregame play on the side here. Number one, because I'm holding Seahawks 14-1. I even staked Seahawks last week at plus money and 14-1 for the NFC, thinking that they win game 1 and then I basically have a free roll the rest of the way here. And I'm not going to hedge out at any point in this game. I'm expecting the Packers' first 15 to be somewhat successful, and they will score some early points. And I would like to get a better number on Seahawks live, like play +7-ish if we see an early touchdown by the Packers here. I'm more nervous than our fellow panelists here about Seahawks' ability to go toe for toe with the Packers, just because I feel like when you give them the opportunity to run and you let them kind of, take their foot off the gas and they take the ball out of Russ's hands is when they're the most vulnerable. And so, maybe they do have a ton of success on the ground, but I would like to see them continue to keep the ball in Russ's hands and have him be kind of, make or break their season here, as opposed to all of a sudden like, oh, we're getting 5 yards of carry out of Marshawn Lynch. And then you just, let him wind down the clock. Because I think you want to kind of preserve as much clock as possible if you're down in this game, and you want to give Russell Wilson the opportunity to come back and get the win if they're down.
Brad, you wanted to come back in there, man?
Yeah, I think that's a good point from Drew on the live betting. I do agree that the Packers are likely to have some good early success. They've done well on that all year. And if they score a touchdown early and you get +7.5 on the Seahawks, I think that's a superb bet. Or trade them on the exchange, whatever, because they will come roaring back. Though there's no way Russ is letting them die. I'm sure he still remembers that NFC Championship game a few years ago where I think Green Bay were up 16-0 or something, and blew it at the end of the day. I wouldn't be surprised to see another one like that. Maybe Green Bay first half, Seahawks full time. Be one to look at.
Yeah, some glorious memories of that one. If you were on the Packers money line, what was the spread at? It was Seahawks about 7.5 point favorite, and they won by 6 in overtime. I think that's just a number that kind of resonates with me. Anyway.
Yeah.
Adam Chernoff, you wanted to come back in also, mate.
Yeah, the Drew sort of sparked. Seattle put up 17 points against the Eagles. They had the highest EPA per dropback of any team in the wild card round, 10.3 yards per pass, and they put up nearly 400 yards of total offense. So I think that 17 points in a way somewhat misleading. And so it's a pretty significant step up for the Packers defensively.
Yeah, I thought the Eagles, they did as well as they can. Can't believe Josh McCown, guys. I actually thought he was retired. I genuinely thought Only I was thinking about a couple of weeks ago, Prof, when you said that he was actually going to be one of the starters wide receiver. He was one of the emergency options as wide receiver. He's a gamer, though. He's a gamer. One question, guys, in from Twitter. Angelo 23, thanks for getting in touch. Think Pete Carroll's leans more on Lynch than closer to Super Bowl he gets? Anyone have any major opinions on that? I think, like Adam said, what are they, 23rd against the run, the Packers? You're definitely going to see more beast mode this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, if there's a week where they're going to lean on it, it's certainly this week right here, where I think last week he only got 6 or 7 carries. I would expect probably 12 to 15 here if the news reports hold true.
Prof?
Yeah, well, last week, 13 carries for 17 yards against the Eagles as a team. So if they're going to use him anywhere, he'll be here. But he just might not have that juice left. The other back, I've forgotten his name, Homer.
Travis Homer,
he just looks a fair bit more dynamic, and they might just be trying to fool themselves with trying to ram the corpse of Marshawn Lynch into the line.
Yeah, quite possibly. Okay, guys.
You remember it was on the money too. It was Seattle minus 8.5, and they did win by 6.
Yeah, I was on the minus that day, Drew. That's exactly what I remember. But that was some game. They won in overtime. Yes, so won by 6.
Yeah.
Didn't have to get the extra point. Let's do a quick recap, guys. So I'm thinking some of the best bets may actually be in some of the selections we already discussed. Obviously, I don't think we're going to go too off piste. 49ers minus 7 seems to be the consensus amongst the group. Titans, Ravens, guys, what way do we kind of fall there? It seems to be favoring Baltimore, but what's the general angle? Is there enough confidence to be taking them? I mean, 9.5 is pretty high.
I think they're all split.
Yeah, I think that's maybe Baltimore team total if that total dies on, but I think it probably comes back up from 46.5 towards 47. Maybe we just swerve that one. Drew, happy to swerve that one?
Yeah, I guess. What was the price? What was the current price? 9.5.
9.5. Yeah, 1.98, just under evens.
I still like 9.5.
Okay,
go on. Let's go with that. Chuck it in.
Yeah, let's chuck it in. Yeah, I think. Look, for me, exactly, probably one of the smaller ones. For me, I just can't see where the Titans get stops against this Ravens offense, and I think they'll get plenty of theirs, and Can you really see the Titans getting the 2021?
No.
I can't see it. I can't see it, mate. Really love this one. Love that. Alternative handicaps all the way for Drew Dinsick.
Real quickly, the Titans have this whole last half of the season have consistently reminded me of the Ravens back when Flacco was kind of just coming on the scene. And they were leaning pretty heavily on Ray Rice, and they had a lot of the same identities. And then, sure enough, I think in the wild card round, that Ravens team beat the Patriots, and Flacco threw 34 yards passing or something insane like that, and they had 240 yards rushing or something like that. And just for historical context, that Ravens team then went on the road and played Peyton Manning and the Colts. Peyton Manning and the Colts the next week. And lost 23.
There you go.
This was when Ray Rice ran amok on the Pats in 2009 in Foxborough. And then the next week they got mowed down by the Colts.
Still a good Ray team. Chiefs, Texans, guys. What are we thinking here? Brad, you're against Drew here. Drew, I think this may be your best bet. We might save it for that. No spoiler alert on that. Adam, it's 9.5 right now. You're happy to be on the Chiefs minus 8, but for anyone else looking at the current market at 9.5, would you be kind of advising them one way or the other on this one?
I wouldn't say no. But not. Yeah. Well, you can go with 9.5.
I'm not just pushing you guys off the cliff this week. Anyway, so the only underdog I think we like is Seahawks +4. I think that's, Drew, I think you might have some reservations there, but I'll be honest, I'm liking that one. I think Russell Wilson gets it done. I think they win outright, actually. I think what are they currently at matchbook in the money line? 2.82. And there's under £4,000 there available on Wednesday evening if anyone wants the 2.82. Right, let's go to best bets time. So the time where we put our reputations on the line. Not so good last week. Anyone win last week, guys?
I don't think so.
What was it?
Last week.
Yeah, it was the Patriots. The two guys at the bottom of the screen, Adam, Drew, we were on the Pats. Prof, what were you on again?
I probably had the Eagles.
I had the Eagles.
Yeah.
So yeah, so there you go. That'll tell you.
I might have had Houston. Actually, it was my best bet.
Yeah, Prof, 1 out of 4. Well done. You get 25%. You're keeping us a small bit above water.
Never in doubt that one.
I had to deal with Josh McCown for 3 quarters. In to his credit, it wasn't him that lost that game. So let's move on to this week. Prof, let's go with you. You're in the club host, the market leader here. What are you fancying this weekend?
Seahawks +4.
Love it. Drew Dinsick.
Under 51 for the Chiefs and Texans.
Adam Chernoff.
I would like to go KC, but that number's gone, so I'll go Titans, Ravens over 46.5 because it's available in Matchbook.
Love it. Okay. 46.5 was slightly better too. 46.5 was 46 earlier for a couple of minutes. My one Best bet of the week, over 44 in the Vikings and Niners. And the reasoning behind this, and I kind of touched on earlier, I think 49ers definitely going to get those, and I don't think that defense is as good as it was earlier on this season. It's not a massive number to clip. I think potentially the 49ers' speed, especially with those running backs, could do a lot of damage against the Minnesota Vikings. Right, guys, we're almost out.
Themselves.
There you go. Get by themselves. Love that. Win 45-0. Happy days. We're out the door. Guys, quickly before I go, a couple of big coaching hires this week. I said the word big, some surprising. Anyone we could be looking at outright markets for next season? Look, let's run through them quickly. Joe Judge to the Patriots. Didn't know who he was. I'd be put my hands up. Special teams coordinator with the Pats. Ron Rivera's gone to the Redskins. Matt Rule with the Panthers. Mike McCarthy with the Cowboys. A pretty surprising one as well, I would suggest. Adam, anything in the outrights next year that I don't think the market's going to be too affected by any of these hires?
Well, the Jets didn't hire anyone, so I don't know if we can. Nothing really. I think the McCarthy hire is getting downplayed a little bit more. Like it was a bad thing, but when you get a coach that took Rodgers through his prime like that and was able to put up those numbers, I think it's a little bit misleading in how people are sort of accepting that. Bit of a better hire than I think it's being made out to be. Not sure what I make of Rule going to Carolina. Yeah. Not sure about the Giants hire either. But I don't think McCarthy's as bad as people are making it out to be.
Drew, anything jumping out at you there? No major surprises?
I've heard some enthusiasm from the analytics community about McCarthy that I will be cautiously keeping an eye on. But my concern overall with the Cowboys has much more to do with personnel, and Jerry Jones is still pulling the strings there. So I don't think I'm getting involved with the Cowboys next season. And Matt Rule, to me, I don't know if this is the right time for him to be taking over an NFL head coaching role.
He's getting $10 million a year for 7 years. He's got a heck of an agent.
He's got a heck of an agent. And he's got a heck of a problem with his quarterback position in Carolina. I don't know what the future looks like there. It's certainly not Allen. It's probably not Greer. And, I don't want to say it's over for Cam Newton without seeing him throw, but I personally still think he's dealing with shoulder injury from 2 seasons ago that may not be fixed. So I'm not optimistic that Matt Rule gets it done. And Joe Judge was a weird one.
It could be. I think they're probably going the whole John Harbaugh route with the special teams, and he's obviously got the pay. But the Patriots lineage it's too overplayed. We've looked at the different coordinators and different special teams coaches that have come out of New England. Charlie Weiss, all these guys. Bill O'Brien's a head coach. Romeo Crennel. Have any of them really panned out?
The beauty of the John Harbaugh was that you paired him with Ozzie Newsome, who was an amazing evaluating talent, especially defensive talent. And he hit drafts year in, year out. And then John Harbaugh staffed around, put it together an amazing staff. John Harbaugh kind of had connections through the Andy Reid tree to a lot of guys who are amazing personnel developers. So I think a lot of things that made the Harbaugh hire successful were kind of unique to that situation. I don't know that you can replicate it with Joe Judge, and especially weird year to give Joe Judge a look after he was responsible for the wide receivers in the Patriots this year, which was one of the weakest units in offense in all of the NFL. And then also in charge of the special teams this year, which had their worst ever year. So it's like, oh, you gave this guy more responsibility this year and everything collapsed. Let's give him a head coaching job. Like, that doesn't add up to me. So that was a really bizarre hire. And you paired him with Dave Gettleman. So, he's destined to fail.
Absolute destined to failure. Prof, your Detroit Lions still have Matt Patricia, which is good. Good news for you,
Yeah, happy days.
Fear the beard.
The interesting thing about all this was all the Mike McCarthy saying how he's reinvented himself, and he apparently had 6 hours sit down with PFF before going into interviews to kind of portray himself as an analytics guru. But I'm sure when it's 4th and 1, he'll be punting it away soon.
All right, that's it. We are out of time. Thank you for watching today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget, if you do want to help us out with the vote for the Smart Betting Club Awards, pin tweets on the Team Matchbook and the Matchbook Pod Twitter pages, and it's in the bio of the podcast. Gentlemen, fantastic job as ever. Enjoy Divisional weekend. Hopefully we'll get you back in the winner's circle. We'll talk to you next week for the conference games.